Welcome to this podcast, which is linked to the upcoming Future of Energy Conference, which is happening on the 24th and 25th of March in Amsterdam. I'm Peter Bright, and I'm here with Andrew Johnstone, the CEO of Climate Fund Manager. Andrew and I have had frequent conversation on this topic and really looking forward to discussing further today. So, Andrew, nice to have you here. I've followed you for a while now, and I'm really impressed with what you've managed to achieve at CFM. Very innovative structure, very different from what we see from other managers, and a lot of that, I understand, is down to you.
Well, Peter, thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to have a chat. Good to see you again as well. Nice to be in The Hague, nice to be in a blustery Monday morning. So I think the summer has come and gone. And so that's probably a good point of departure of transition as we look at the transition of the seasons to reflect on the transition of energy.
Indeed.
So I'm looking forward to the chat.
Yes.
Good to be here.
Exactly. And maybe you could give a quick introduction to yourself. I know, as I say, Climate Fund Managers have managed to basically structure the way you set up the funds to basically cascade and into different risk categories and thereby rewarding as and when the risk is taken and mitigating a lot of the risk in climate investment. So really curious to learn more about that from your side, how it came about.
So, Peter, the most recent chapter, which, as you say, is identified as Climate Fund Managers chapter, is sort of a continuation of my journey in infrastructure. I started as an actual investor, as a fund manager almost 25 years ago. Coincidentally, on the eve of the MDGs, which sort of prescribed a certain way for society to cohabit in pursuit of a nice sustainable planet. Subsequently then followed by the SDGs in 2015, and now here we are, 25 years later, with 10 years to go to achieve a sustainable planet. All right, so energy transition and CFM fits into this continuum of activities, which, as I say, if I think back 25 years ago, it was all about infrastructure, and of which energy was part, but it was economic infrastructure. It was economically infrastructure that enabled economic growth on the basis that economic trickle-down effect had a beneficial effect to everybody. Excuse me. Of that infrastructure opportunity set, energy was a part. It was a relatively easy part to finance, because it was big, it was bulky, it was utility scale, and governments bought it. So from a financing perspective, it was probably on the easier end than the more difficult things like toll roads and airports and water, because those were really more merchant-type assets, community offtake-type assets, as opposed to state. Then what happened is that energy adequacy and being solved by large-scale plants then evolved into a climate theme. And energy already started pivoting from being the availability of it to the greenness of it. And it became almost the poster child of climate finance. This is where the CFM story starts. So 2015 was the Paris 21, the Paris Agreement. That was CFM's coming out party with Climate Investor 1. And on the front of on the tin was renewable energy. And really what it sort of started talking to was infrastructure being less of a GDP asset type and more of a climate asset type. And as that momentum has grown, so energy has become now a vehicle of decarbonization. And here we are in energy transition. And through that whole journey, the constant has been the use of money. The variable is being how you use it. And increasingly the way you use it requires it to be more and more bold, more and more agile, and more and more risk absorbent.
Correct, and that's what we've seen. I mean, the market continues to change, and even in the 10 years where you've been with CFM, we've seen phenomenal change. What is the sort of the key things that you've witnessed, and how have you dealt with it?
I would say there are probably 5 main things that we anticipated to a degree or not at all.
Okay.
Let me start with
Welcome to the new world.
Exactly. That's exactly right. What we didn't anticipate really was COVID. Yeah, and the consequence of that is twofold. One is it introduced inflation back into our lives. And we saw that post-COVID, when everybody got sort of comfortable that the health issues are solved, but the wall of inflation then swept over us like a tsunami.
Economic reality.
And that affected everything. That affected power purchase agreements that are being contracted on a flat nominal basis. It affected cost of goods, supply chains. And so all of a sudden, we need to find financing models that firstly had to deal with projects that are being funded and structured in a pre-COVID world and the consequence of that, as well as new type of funding models which actually accommodate the fact that inflation is real and likely to stay. So that's probably the first thing. The second was the dependency of supply chain and the interruptions that arose from that. And looking at how you could actually appoint EPC contractors and thinking that through an EPC wrap, you were covered.
Yeah.
Well, you weren't, you know.
As always.
As always. And that stuff comes home to roost. So what do you do with it? Well, we started getting quite critical on the three main forecasts that you have to make when you go into construction. How much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take? And is it going to do what you plan it to do?
Yep.
And item 1 and 3, you can get quite close. You know, you can get within 10%. Item 2, how long is it going to take? That is really, and was prior, COVID highlighted just how extreme you can be. And even now, it is probably the biggest single forecasting risk. And that speaks to supply chains. So that would be the second thing. The third thing I would say is probably the pivot around policy and geopolitics. I mentioned COP21 and the world, the first 10 years of a climate, flat earth globalization.
Yeah.
COVID changed that as well. COVID affected local politics in terms of the orientation of the political bias. It affected local economics. And then at a macro level, it's like Trump is a great example of something that probably started prior.
Definitely.
That was accelerated.
Yes.
And that sort of put climate a little bit to the left, and GDP, economic growth, and domestic interest more front and center. That sort of changed the model a little bit. So we are called climate fund managers. We're not called national interest fund managers. Yet we live in both those worlds.
Correct.
And have to manage the nuances of both.
Yeah.
Probably the final thing is technology. You know, technology continues to evolve at a rate which is blistering. We saw that in the solar. We saw it not so much in wind, but certainly the solar space. And there was an expectation, still remains an expectation, that Moore's law of technology will manifest in things like green hydrogen. We're starting to see it coming through, but a little bit slower.
Yeah.
What we are seeing is the emergence of AI into the way that decisions are made, both within investors, within fund managers, and also with supply chains. So trying to anticipate and keep abreast of that technological acceleration, I think, is something which we anticipated, but are we surprised by how quickly it goes when it goes? So those, I think, have been the main things. I think in conclusion, the enormity of the climate challenge continues to just present itself as different parts of that climate world interact. It used to be just about greenhouse gas and global warming, and now it's natural assets, biodiversity, it's everything that falls within its planetary limits, and they're overlapping, and with that, the numbers just become bigger and bigger.
Absolutely correct, absolutely. And thank you for that summary, which was very interesting. But what's clear is that we've gone through a lot of change, but it doesn't feel like it's going to slow down. Quite the contrary, it feels like it's going to go up. So what do you see as the challenges over the next 2 years for yourself, for developers, for constructors, et cetera, et cetera?
I think the challenge is and remains that one part of the world is becoming, and from a finance perspective, is becoming more and more rigid. There's two events of 9/11 that brought financial crimes regulation into our lives, and subprime, that brought risk management regulation into our lives. Those two overlaid brought an enormous amount of rigidity to regulated financial regulations. And they still remain in place. And those prescribe a degree of predictability and the use of capital. The reality on the other side is we're seeing events becoming more extreme in their consequences, higher in their frequency, and with that comes a higher forecasting risk.
Yeah.
So you've got these two trends that unfortunately are diverging.
Yeah, making our life difficult.
And I know one's not going to come back.
Not for the time being.
This one's going to go that way. So it's really up to regulation and also capital allocators, debt or equity or listed or unlisted, to actually be mindful of the fact that the risk, ambient risk of the future is greater than it was in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to, that won't go away. We need to find ways to absorb it, not avoid it, absorb it. And that's sort of what blended finance seeks to do. So that's my main intellectual challenge.
Yeah.
It's also my committed life challenge to try and bring these two things closer than where they currently are.
And maybe you can elaborate a little bit about how you've, through the structuring of CFM, how you've managed to take those challenges on and basically ensure that the economic viability through the different stages continues to make sense.
Okay. When we started the journey of CFM, we were frustrated project financiers. We've been trying to finance these type of projects, as I say, for the last since 2000, even prior to that. And so we were frustrated in ourselves and our inability to convert what we knew into an outcome which we wanted at the frequency we needed. So we started with this. We went through something called the Innovation Lab for Climate Finance, hosted by an entity called Climate Policy Initiative, of which Climate Investor One ultimately became the poster child. And through that journey, we came up with what we thought, off a wide-body session, a perfect investment vehicle would look and feel like. And that was sort of where Climate Investor One ended up. During that journey, the term blended finance evolved. It was allegedly a term which was coined by the IFC back in the 70s, so it's not a new name, but it just got prominence as with the run-up to Paris, the Paris Agreement. So we were sitting there as frustrated blended financiers, noodling, and somebody said, "What is this thing that you guys are doing?" I said, "Well, we think this is blended finance." And as it went through the journey, we came up with this Climate Investor One, and we set about implementing it, and it was actually a very successful first launch. So our frustration as blended finance manifested in a degree of elation and sort of self-actualization as blended financiers. So we consider ourselves now to be liberated blended financiers, born out of a petri dish of frustrated project financiers.
Beautiful.
And that's been our journey.
Excellent. And do you have any examples of, because it sounds like you've had to be very resilient and had to come up with solutions all the time. So do you have any examples of these sudden changes and how you reacted to those and how you adapted?
So, yes, I do indeed. I think there are, again, COVID was a really interesting experience for us because it made us focus very heavily on the construction stage of the projects which we were in mid-construction. Suddenly all the presumptions we had made about delegation of responsibility to contractors and we would just, as asset owners, get the finished product, suddenly didn't work. So we had to get onto the ground, we had to get involved in knitting suppliers and subcontractors. There was payment interruptions, there were permitting interruptions. And unfortunately, what we also found is that some of the contractors are now starting to substitute on-the-ground capacity with what they could find locally as opposed to importing as to what they could import locally. Now, That, in some instances, actually was prejudicial to the quality of the build. We started dealing with failures on sites. We had head walls that collapsed. We had turbines that didn't quite work the way they should.
Yeah.
And our site incidences started going up. So what we found ourselves doing as a manager is actually taking health and safety a lot more seriously. We went and found ourselves a health and safety manager. We created a health and safety team within essentially an infrastructure fund manager. It's the first time I've done that in 3 managers. And we started actually doing toolbox talks on the ground with contractors. That was something which we had to do because of the circumstance had changed. That's a good example of the agility that was required. Another thing I think was what we've seen during 2024. Very, very key year for us. When half the world went to the ballot box and came up with a result that we didn't really expect.
The world has changed.
The world changed. And with that, what became apparent was stakeholder engagement, trying to read what stakeholders need and want.
Yeah.
Then became a much more visceral thing in the business because we were designed with a certain purpose, with a certain product, and one does fall into the trap of if all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And we had Climate Investor 1 and a fund manager. So we've had to adapt to that. And what's come out of that probably more embedded national interest theme post the elections of 24 is pools of capital which are more regional, which are looking for a more regional impact. So born out of that has come our Namibian fund, our South African fund. Last year we established a Malaysian fund. So all these regional funds, which 10 years ago would have been a complete no-no.
Correct.
Because they don't offer that broad diversification that investors want. But now we actually live in a world which needs to respond to those, which is actually also quite pertinent to decarbonisation and energy transition, because that's a local issue. NDCs and footprints are exactly what they are. They're like under your foot.
Yeah.
So having a business model that responds at a local, regional level, but is based on and cognizant of the larger global themes, because it needs to do both to get the scale and the momentum. And those two are critical.
Absolutely.
It's all very well having scale, but if you haven't got momentum, you just don't ever get to impact.
Yeah.
So,
and without scale, impact is difficult.
It is. And it's resulted in a really interesting organisation. Somebody asked me the other day about this comparison of the rigidity that I refer to in terms of regulation and the predictability that presumes, and the awareness that the next tsunami may be tomorrow, but we don't know, and how do you respond to that? And I came up with this sort of one-liner as to how I think it describes us and our business. And I think we're an organisation that responds and adapts as opposed to predicts and plans.
Yeah.
Now, you need a bit of both, but we are very much more the former than the latter. And so responding and adapting requires a sort of degree of agility, a degree of comfort in a constant state of flux. And what sustains that, I think, is a central purpose, which is to save the planet.
Perfect. Beautiful. Prepare for the unpredictable and really be ready for it. Very, very nice. I don't know if you have any sort of closing thoughts before we end this very interesting conversation.
I have thousands.
As usual. Try and limit it, Andy.
I will. I think time is of the essence. I've referred to the fact we're in year 25 of a 30-year global plan that was made up of 2 times 15s, MDGs, SDGs.
Yeah.
All right? And basically we're down to the last 5 years of the SDG plan, and we don't look in pretty good shape. We've really got a
few distractions on the way.
Exactly. We've got a in I think in rugby terms, in the last 20 minutes of the game, you pull in the bench and you pull in all your big players,
Yeah.
your impact players, and you go for the win. That's sort of where we are. So momentum really is key. And to maintain the momentum, we need to try and make those big decisions quicker and not get stuck on the small decisions that are important, but they just dilute the momentum. That sort of thing concerns me. I also think we're in a bit of an ebb and flow. I think this is a bit of a pendulum. I think we are in the next 5 years of GDP-focused infrastructure, and that's good. I really think it's good. I think it will put a further stimulus behind what we want to do. It just will be less of a climate purpose and more of a humanity well-being, economic sustainability, and national good, and then it'll swing back again. So I think that we should look through to the end result, which is a nice green place to live.
Indeed, indeed. Well, on those thoughts, thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I've been Peter Bride, and Andrew, nice to have you here as usual. Good conversation, and we look forward to seeing you all at the Fast-Changing Energy Transition Global Markets Conference in Amsterdam on the 24th and 25th of March. If you want to investigate further, go to solarplaza.com/event/future-of-energy. Looking forward to seeing you all there. Thank you so much.